Meeting 3 o'clock, Wednesday, June 26th, and we're here to discuss microgrid. Can I have a roll call?
Calling the roll, Ms. Simon.
Here.
Ms. Brown. Here. Mr. Jones.
Here.
Ms. Stevens.
Present.
Mr. Brady.
Here.
There was a quorum. Also like the record to reflect that council members Baker and Miller are in attendance.
Thank you very much. Any public comment?
No, Madam Chair, no one is signed in.
We have minutes from June 19th. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes, please? Second. All in favor? Aye. Minutes approved. Okay, so we're going to move into the matter before us. Can you read the resolution 2019-0152?
Resolution number 2019-0152, authorizing a contract with Middo in the amount not to exceed $235,000 for consulting services for development of a request for proposals for operation of a local microgrid for the period 5/3/2019 through 12/31/2020.
Thank you. And Director Foley's here to speak on this resolution.
Thanks, Councilwoman Simon. Appreciate it. Mike Foley, Director of Sustainability. I'm here to talk on the resolution. And with me, I have a number of parties who have been working with us for the last couple of years on this microgrid proposal. So we have folks from Cleveland State, Mark Henning, a couple folks from Mid-Owl Engineering, who this first contract to run the RFP is for. And we have Katie Jamoya and Chris Herzl from Cleveland Public Power, who are here as well. They're one of the partners in the microgrid project. So I've got a PowerPoint presentation I was going to run through with you if I could. And I'm not good at these things, so let's see. That one? Okay. Okay, so this is for the initial proposal in front of you today is to hire Mid-Owl Engineering for $235,000, and it's coming out of the Sustainability Projects Fund. And the idea is to have Mid-Owl run an RFP process to hire an eventual developer for a downtown electric microgrid. And I'm going to walk through why we think that's important. But first of all, what is a microgrid? It's kind of this buzz term in sustainability electricity circles. So we wanted to walk through exactly what a microgrid is. So a microgrid is basically this network or system. So when the larger electric grid goes down, there is a local geographic area where the grid can stay up. And it is a contained energy system capable of balancing the local supply of electricity. So there has to be a local supplier of electrons into this local grid and the demand that's needed within this local geography. It can incorporate multiple technologies, so it can distributive technology, so it can incorporate solar, it can incorporate wind, it can incorporate combined heat and power, which is what we're talking about here in our local microgrid. It maximizes reliability and efficiency. It can include other utilities such as steam and hot water and chilled water and network connectivity. But the main function of it is that it can operate in islanded mode, meaning it can be disconnected from the larger grid. And so we've got a video. We ran this at the State of the County speech. And let's see. And it's a good explainer, I think, of at least what we're talking about for Cleveland.
Electricity is an interesting thing. It has to be produced and consumed instantaneously. It's one of the few things that you can't store. We figured out in the past 100 years how to move it over very long distances with power lines, but that is actually very inefficient and very risky and not very reliable. It's very susceptible to any kind of imaginable problem. So by having the distance between where you make the power and where you use the power very short, you significantly increase the reliability and resiliency of the system. The microgrid region that we're talking about is really defined by a few geographic features within Cleveland: the lake on the north side, the river on the west and south side, and then East 55th Street on the east side. What a microgrid has the capability to do is create a little island off of the major grid. So if the major grid is experiencing an issue, be that a cybersecurity attack or a superstorm, that the microgrid can operate independently and provide the local consumers a very highly reliable and resilient source of energy.
All of our employees are working on computers, and so if those are off, no one can work. But beyond that, due to the nature of the work we do, which is typically R&D, and we're running data models, those all run on servers. They could run for days or weeks. If we lose power in the middle of something like that, at best, we're going to lose time. It could set us back on deadlines or deliverables. Being a small business, we don't have the budget to invest in a complex power system. It's one more tool that the county can add to complete that package.
That's one of the major driving business cases for the microgrid, is to bring companies in who have a highly sensitive system, who do not tolerate power loss very well. This is the way of the future. We are going to need to decentralize so that we can have local, regional control of these systems and build them as secure as they need to be.
We do have a really big coalition of people working on this project, from both the private and public sector, from places like the Cleveland Foundation, from CPP, from the county. And it's really important to kind of work together to make sure that the story synchronizes.
So it's kind of just a broad picture of what our potential microgrid will look like, or could look like, or what it is. As we've kind of worked on this over the last couple of years, we've kind of discerned or thought through what would be where's a logical place where this should be. Sorry about that. I get it the wrong way. There we go. And so this is what we're concentrating on in terms of the geography for our local microgrid. And as Ali Ahmed, who was one of the engineers who worked on this project with us, said, it would be from East 55th to the river, from roughly Carnegie, maybe a little bit south of Carnegie, up to the lake. And one of the reasons we would do it there is, one is there's a lot of business, but two is that Cleveland Thermal operates there, and they've got a permit to do up to a 50 megawatt combined heat and power plant on site at their facility over on East 18th Street. And the other reason is Cleveland Public Power has lines that run underground between East 55th and downtown. So one of the elements of a microgrid is you want as much safety or resiliency as possible. And so because they've got that infrastructure already built in and kind of rules that basically establish about how you do, where your electric line should be, that's part of the reasons why we've kind of looked at this as a geography for the first microgrid. In general, what we're talking about is about a $100 million project that is, we've kind of done this economic kind of modeling of what could take place with a combined heat and power plant with the capabilities that we're talking about with Cleveland Thermal. We're leveraging existing CPP infrastructure and Cleveland Thermal generation. One of the things we want to embed in as we design this microgrid is that there's going to be, people are going to be buying power, right? So one of the things is if we build this thing, that there's going to be companies that have high needs for resiliency, and they're going to be paying a little bit more for their electricity, but they're willing to do that because they want the high resiliency. We want to build in actually a little bit more for that, so we create a kind of a sustainable economic development fund that is embedded in the rates that are charged to off-takers or customers. So some of that money comes back for future use for economic development. And that this is a three-way decision-making kind of model. So it would be between us, the Cleveland Foundation, and CPP on at the end of the day on who we ultimately decide on who will be the developer and financier for the project. And again, just in terms of leveraging the existing infrastructure, so Cleveland Public Power, our local municipal electric company, They've got an existing electric distribution system. They've got substations in this territory. They have street level distribution. They've got metering and control systems. They've got, the big thing that they have is regulatory flexibility. So they don't need to go to the Public Utility Commission of Ohio to get this passed. They can pass this at Cleveland City Council. So there's it's a very, one of the kind of interesting things about having a municipal electricity company involved is that they've got that ability to do some of this stuff. The Cleveland Thermal, again, will have this combined heat and power generation ability. And so basically that is something that, and Marty can talk about that from Mid-Out in a couple minutes later on, but basically it's the waste heat that comes out of the generation from, they've got a natural gas facility that generates heat and cold water underground for pipes in this kind of downtown district. So they generate the air conditioning and the heating for this building basically through underground pipes. And they generate that through natural gas. That's natural gas plant. But there's waste heat that comes out of their facility, and you can turn that into electricity. And so with this permit that Cleveland Thermal has, we can use that waste heat to turn that into electricity to power the microgrid. Again, the footprint is East 55th to the river, Carnegie to the lake. And one of the things that we asked CSU to do when we were looking at this is, you know, where is potential land? So we're thinking this is, you know, an economic development activity. Do we have land available that if we're trying to draw companies or businesses here, do we have available land? So one of the things that CSU did is they've put together basically a map of available both kind of vacant land, parking lots, but also large buildings that have at least 50,000 square feet. So if we're going to use this as an economic development attractor, which we want to do, then do we have available land? And we do. So the question is, we build this, will people come? That's the big question, right? And we think we will, and I'm going to ask Mark Henning to come up, but CSU has done a really great job of trying to discern this, right? If we build this microgrid and we're able to sell electricity at a affordable price, which we think we're able to do, would anyone come and want to use it? At least the folks we're thinking about are universities. We've got Cleveland State here, obviously. Data and financial centers, law, accounting, and consulting firms, hospitals, the medical industry, emergency services, food services, R&D companies are kind of the mix of where you think of kind of who may be interested in this. But I'm going to turn it over to Mark for the next couple of slides just to talk about the studies that CSU has done that has really kind of tried to do a deep dive into who may be interested in coming and taking part of the microgrid.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, my name is Mark Henning. I'm with the Energy Policy Center at Cleveland State University in the Urban Affairs College. And as Mike was talking about, we were looking at the kind of the economic development perspective, what industries, what sectors might be interested in this kind of reliable power that a microgrid could provide. So one of the first things we looked at was something called, we're trying to find metrics that can sort of lead us down a path of identifying interest, and we use this metric called the value of lost load for all subsectors. We looked at data for first the whole United States, data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Census Bureau, and this value of lost load, it reflects the economic consequences of power supply interruptedness, and it's been used by regional transmission organizations such as PJM to estimate customer willingness to pay for reliable electric service. And it's a ratio of gross value added to electricity consumption within a subsector, for instance. And it allowed us to identify a sample of subsectors that would seem to especially value reliable power based on the amount of production they forfeit in the event of an outage. When the power goes out, it's like how many dollars are they losing in production per kilowatt hour of electricity not consumed. And among the highest values of lost load, as we see here in the chart, we identified were in subsectors such as professional, scientific, and technical services, finance and insurance, and especially outpatient-based healthcare services, which increasingly relies on information technology to deliver value to customers and to patients. And so we saw losses in the range of $20 to $100 per kilowatt hour of electricity not consumed in terms of lost production. So for instance, 1 megawatt facility like an office that was in the securities and financial investment subsector might be expected to realize lost production of around $50,000 for a single hour's worth of outage under this sort of analysis, this kind of framework. But this is actually consistent with anecdotal evidence. When we go out and we've interviewed local businesses, commercial enterprises, and they back that up. They confirm they lose tens of thousands, if not even up to $100,000 per hour when their power goes out, and lost production and economic activity. And one of the other things we did to try to get at this idea of who would be willing to pay extra for this kind of service that a microgrid could provide, we did a survey. We commissioned a market research firm to survey individuals who directly impact the energy procurement decisions at their companies. The majority of the respondents, there were 155 respondents that were surveyed by a company out of Utah called Qualtrics. They surveyed owners, presidents, C-level executives, department directors. The majority of the respondents were individuals who had those sorts of positions, decision makers at their companies. And through the survey, we were able to gather information on things such as location preferences, including how important energy factors are in locating a business or expanding, the stated costs of power interruptions in terms of that lost productivity, and the familiarity that respondents have with microgrids in general and their opinion of them. Possibly the most important question we asked, as we see illustrated here in the PowerPoint slide, was what all-in price per kilowatt hour for electricity that included 99.99% availability, which is around 5 minutes of downtime per year, would compel a company to move or expand its operations within a microgrid. Around 25% of survey respondents expressed a willingness to pay 14 cents a kilowatt hour, while a little more than 20% indicated that 15 cents would be a significant inducement. The threshold of 14 cents or thereabouts is an important threshold because our high-level cost modeling indicates, after we factor in all the capital expenditures and the cost of operations, that a microgrid in downtown Cleveland could supply 5.9 power for around 13 cents a kilowatt hour at the most, and actually possibly even less. Oh, go ahead. And so there's the economic development, and then so what are the consequences of this? What are the potential benefits of this economic development in terms of job growth that might not otherwise occur? And so to look at that, we looked at those subsectors that we identified through our value of lost load analysis, those subsectors that seem particularly willing to pay a premium for access to higher quality, more reliable power. And we projected likely future additions to employment resulting from microgrid development. These subsectors are forecast by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, those subsectors that I mentioned in the first slide. There's a forecast by the BLS to experience relatively high employment growth nationally over the next decade. Local employment growth in these areas, however, in Cuyahoga County and in downtown Cleveland, has lagged behind national growth. We assume, based on our research, what we found was that a microgrid could provide the business infrastructure upgrade that could eliminate this disadvantage that the region has experienced in this area, and could close the growth gap from local growth and that has lagged behind national growth in these subsectors. And so we think that because we know that, for instance, the quality of electricity is among the major drivers of regional economic growth, according to organizations such as the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Microgrids have been shown by federal agencies such as the Department of Defense to improve the quality and reliability of delivered power and to reduce energy costs. And the same subsectors that were represented in our survey that we identified as valuing reliable power, through our survey, we saw that they would be most willing out of all subsectors to make location decisions based on power reliability needs. So they're extremely sensitive relative to other industries to having reliable power to operate at lower costs and to provide higher value to their customers. And so our projections were that if we could eliminate this lag in employment growth in these subsectors, as a result of this business infrastructure upgrade, we would see around 1,000 additional microgrid-induced jobs over the next 5 to 10 years than would otherwise occur in the footprint of the microgrid. And that the associated increase in payroll to go along with those jobs would be around $90 million based on 1,000 extra employees within those subsectors. So I'll be glad to answer any questions once we're done with the rest of the presentation. Thank you very much.
If I could just go back real quick, one slide. The 14. So one of the things we've been talking about in the microgrid is that there'd be different tiers of customers, by the way. So that the customer really needs and really wants high resilient power. The grid goes down, it goes down for 2 to 3 weeks. They've got power during that whole time frame. They would pay kind of a higher level. Maybe that's the 13 or 14 cents a kilowatt hour. But also maybe there's a customer that just, maybe they've already got backup generation in their business and all they want is an hour, coverage in order to get their backup generator. So maybe what they would pay is 10 or 11. And then there may be customers within the geography that just don't care. If the grid goes out, we're going to go out. So they're going to pay whatever the rate is that CPP and the microgrid operators kind of agree on. So that just so you know that there's kind of different off-takers that would have maybe different needs for what they want, I guess, right? So I just want to walk through. So where we're at now, we've done kind of this report with CSU and CASE and Cleveland Public Power. The Cleveland Foundation gave us a grant for $250,000 to help us get this up off the road. The conclusion, by the way, from the reports and the study is that this is doable and we can build resilient downtown system at commercial electricity rates. The next steps are that we would like to engage Mid-Owl and Cleveland State to lead this RFP process, and that the RFQ would hopefully go out and the request for qualifications basically would send this out to interested parties in September. Get responses back, whittle that down to 3 or 4, and then do an RFP process from that point on. And then start making evaluations and decisions in early winter of 2020, and make a decision and go to contract in 2020. So the players that just from this point on would be Mid-Owl, and Mid-Owl is important because they are, and CPP can kind of talk about this if you have questions about it. Mid-Owl is the contracted kind of engineering consultant for Cleveland Public Power. So they've had a contract with CPP for the last 20 years. They know their grid inside and out. They've got, trust. They've got non-disclosure agreements. They are kind of the experts on the CPP grid, and they understand microgrids. So we want them to kind of be the technical leaders of the RFP process. Cleveland State University, which we have a separate item on the Board of Control agenda on for Monday, basically. We want them in the mix of this because they've been kind of the intellectual leaders, and they also have kind of worked a lot on customer development. There's kind of policy implications we want to kind of build into this RFP process. And they've really become kind of, more than anyone I know, they know this stuff pretty well. And then the city, county, and the Cleveland Foundation would be making the ultimate decision. So the way we've written an MOU between the 3 organizations. We would each get 2 votes to kind of finally make a decision at the end of the day on how and when to go forward. And then just the I guess the money, right? The risks and rewards, I think. So from the county, what we're talking about is that out of the Sustainability Projects Fund, which was money that was set aside. It was money that was originally set up by the county commissioners years ago for economic development related to sustainability projects. And so that money's been repopulated. It was given to Lincoln Electric at one point for a loan to Lincoln Electric, and that money's been repaid, and that money's gone into the Sustainability Projects Fund. So kind of the impetus for that fund was kind of on sustainable economic development. We would take the money out. We would take $315,000 out of that fund, and it's got about $600,000 or $700,000 in it right now. We would be making payments to Mid-Owl and CSU. We will likely, and I can't say this, it's promise because there's a vote tomorrow at the Cleveland Foundation board. But the Cleveland Foundation is really interested in this project. There's a letter I think that you have from Ron Richard, who is the chair of the Cleveland Foundation. They are voting tomorrow on backfilling some of the money we are fronting for this project in the amount of $200,000. So assuming that happens, then our cut of the pie would be $115,000. Cleveland Foundation would be $200,000. Additionally, as we write the RFP and the winning bidder, we would require them to repay our money. So the pre-development costs would be repaid by whoever wins the final bid. This is a $100 million project, right? So $315,000 coming back to us is a pretty low amount compared to the ultimate cut. So. So we think that that's doable, and it's kind of practice, I think, in the industry in some respects. So we would get our pre-development dollars paid back to us. The rewards are this is the first of its kind microgrid district, a development district. Microgrids have been, it's, as I said, it's kind of this buzz term, but it's mostly for things like college campuses and Air Force bases. There haven't been any kind of districts the size like that we're contemplating anywhere that we know of in the world, right? So this could be the first kind of district-wide microgrid project. And so we think that's being a first mover around something like this is important. The new jobs that would come to the district, as Mark talked about, the $91 million of new revenue, plus income tax, sales tax, other things that happen there. It's $100 million. We estimate right now it's about a $100 million project. So someone who's going to pay that $100 million, right? It's the developer is going to be paid that $100 million, and they're going to make money off this project. So we've had we've had a lot of discussions with a lot of big energy type companies, NG, AMP, not AMP. AEP Financial, Shell gas companies interested, the Carlyle Group, which is a big kind of financial company. So there's a lot of interest in a lot of large developers who are interested in this project. And again, we want to, as we develop it, we want to embed in kind of the rate that there's a sustainable fund or economic development fund coming back to the county and the city to use for future projects. And additionally, this helps with CPP infrastructure. So there's three substations three or four substations that are in this district that, as the microgrid developer comes in, they're going to have to upgrade. They're going to have to put money into to make sure that they can fit the microgrid system. There's wires underground. Some of those wires can be used, but a lot of them are going to be new, and the microgrid operator and developer will replace or put new lines in. There's control systems, there's other kind of engineering type things for electric distribution systems that need to take place that this developer would be required to kind of help out and put dollars into, put resources into. So I think that's my last slide. That's my last slide. So with that, more than willing to take questions, and I don't know if Mark and Middow and CPP, if you guys want to come up, if you have any questions for any of us, we're more than willing to respond.
Questions from the committee? Councilwoman Stevens, Brown, to start.
You have brought a third party to design or write the RFP. You have partners that are, I would hope, understand the core reasons for doing a microgrid with CPP and Cleveland Thermo. Why aren't they taking the lead and paying for the RFP for a microgrid?
It's a good question. This is kind of an idea that's germinated from the county and with the Cleveland Foundation. We've really kind of, we pushed the, I guess, hiring, working with Cleveland Foundation, hiring CSU, working with Middow and others to put this together. It's been kind of our baby, to be honest with you. We brought it to CPP, and to be honest with you, we had a lot of long discussions with them, and they are certainly interested. They wouldn't be here today, and they wouldn't be part of the MOU. But kind of one of the things we said is that we're willing to kind of front the effort, I think, to get this thing off the ground. So. And as we said, and as we write the RFP, we're hoping that our dollars are going to be reimbursed to us at the end of the day.
I didn't clearly understand who would reimburse our dollars. I saw that if it's a $315,000 total project cost for this first stage, if 100,000 came from Cleveland Foundation, that would reduce what we have to put out.
Yeah, so 315,000 total for this kind of RFP process. $200,000, assuming they vote yes tomorrow, will come from the Cleveland Foundation, and the rest from the county.
So that would reduce us to
115.
115.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But still nothing from Cleveland Public Power or Cleveland Thermo, who ultimately would benefit more than just as much as we would.
Well, correct. They will benefit, and they will be putting time into this, and they are supportive of the project, obviously, but at this point, they are not putting money for this pre-development work, right?
Okay. So could we have some more specificity on these companies that would generate this $91 million benefit to us? I mean, you did a profile that says they're financial institutions or financial service providers like who?
Yeah, I could try to answer that. I don't. We've spoken with local biotech companies in Cleveland who are not ready to publicly commit because before a detailed engineering study is done, they wouldn't know exactly what the rate is. We have a general idea how much it would cost on a per kilowatt hour basis, but until an actual engineering firm gets in there and details all the costs, they won't know. The potential off-taker, like a biotech company, wouldn't know, but they've expressed interest. Some federal agencies, such as the GSA, who manages buildings, such as the Celebrys building, has expressed an interest. But there again, I think they need to know that, get a better grasp on what they would actually have to pay in order to be on the microgrid. And so we have spoken with some local firms that, again, I don't think would be willing yet to step out and say, yes, we would be an off-taker, but they have expressed an interest.
So what happens if we design an RFP and go to bid and nobody bites?
Yeah, I mean, Councilwoman, that's the risk, right? So we don't think that's going to happen. We really have had a lot of interest from developers of, energy systems who are, and you've got one in front of you from Rockwell, I think, who says we think this is a great thing. We're actually willing to bring our own capital to the party, right? So we think that there's, and Rockwell's not the only one we've had discussions with, but it's the letter I had is available to me easily, so that I included it. So we think that there's folks out there who want to do this. Microgrids are the thing of the future, right? They're not going to go away. Energy companies are starting to just develop practices, basically, around microgrid development. Having kind of bragging rights around one of the first microgrid districts, I think, is something that developers and big engineering companies want to be able to brag about at some point. I don't know if Marty has any.
The flip of the question, from if it's a total disaster to if it works well, what is the control mechanism that allows us to not only get our $115,000 back first, but share in the wealth?
Well, the share in the wealth, I think, is when we build in the rate structure, this money coming back for an economic development sustainability fee. I don't think we're allowed to, and I'll defer to the law department, I don't know that we can have an interest in an ongoing entity or an ongoing company like that. But we've tried to build into the rate structure that there will be money coming back to the county and the city to do future economic development and sustainability.
And so is that structured as a percentage? Is it structured as if the rate ends up being 14 cents an hour, that included in the 14 cents is a percentage for the county?
Correct.
Or is it a flat fee for the county?
I think it would be a flat fee. So instead of 14 cents, maybe it's 14.2 cents or 14.25 cents. So embedded in that rate would be some amount coming back for an economic development fund.
And that will be defined in the RFP, or would it be defined after?
It'll be in
Or
the
is
RFP.
it in the MOU?
It's not in the MOU, no. It is, as we investigate this through this RFP process, I think probably the RFQ stage will get feedback from big companies. Are you interested in this? I mean, are you willing to do this? Can you make money with 2.2 cents a kilowatt hour for an economic development fee, 0.4 cents for an economic development fee? I think it probably comes at the RFP phase. I don't know
I could say
if Marty would agree to that.
I could say a few words to help explain the microgrid a little further. My name is Marty Ellman. I work for Middo. I'm a business manager in the power and energy group. Degreed electrical engineer in the power industry, registered professional, and pretty much been doing utility and power work and distributed generation work for the past several decades. So it's kind of an overview of where I'm coming from. Middo's headquartered right down the street here in Cleveland, 600 plus employees total, one of the primary engineering firms in the Cleveland area, and very involved in the utility and the distributed generation field and the growth of it associated with these systems. So from a standpoint of our expertise and involvement, this is an area of a lot of focus and interest on us. So from a standpoint of us being involved with it, we're very appreciative to be also included as a potential party and partner in this effort. The comment was made of us, our involvement with Cleveland Public Power for the past couple of decades, being their engineer associated with their infrastructure improvement projects, which involved everything from substation installations to the southerly transmission line addition that's in the process right now, and other things. So we have been very involved with CPP and knowledgeable of their site and their system, and we've been very appreciative of our relationship with them, which every 2 years they go out for an RFP that we have to respond to and competitively bid on. And we've been fortunate that we've been able to secure that contract with them from the trust and the performance that we've been able to give to them. So as part of that, the interconnection to CPP with this microgrid is kind of where Middo got pulled into from the original development team. When they had the concept for it and said, okay, well, start looking at the details more so of how can this interface with Cleveland Public Power, and we were pulled into the process to help share our knowledge and expertise of where those points could be with CPP, but along with what was kind of flagged before, our NDA and our confidentiality with CPP system, so that we weren't, didn't have someone conveying some other aspects outside of what CPPs want on their system, to portray, and where those involvements extent-wise would be. So that's at least where I'm coming from, and where the CPP arrangement is. From the microgrid itself, it will be connected to Cleveland Public Power as its primary utility infrastructure point source, but then it will also have a distributed generation component, of which could be different aspects depending on the developer who proposes on it. Cleveland Thermal and their combined heat and power system potential has been a major potential entity of that. They're planning on putting a combined heat and power addition to where it would be combustion turbines driving a boiler to produce additional steam that they can use, as Mike said, the waste heat from those boilers to be part of their generation portion. And that becomes the generation backup primary component, such that if CPP's connection goes down because the grid went down and their supply from First Energy went away, that now this microgrid is running under the generation that's tied into it component-wise. So the end developer, kind of to get back to where Cheryl's question kind of started from, is that developer, as we put the RFP out, is going to look at the cost that they would have to put to build the system out, to have power purchase agreements with Cleveland Public Power to purchase power from, to have power purchase agreements with the generation suppliers like Cleveland Thermal, and then to have power purchase or power off-taker agreements with potential customers, whether that was CSU or a data center company or whoever. And that's where the RFP process will actually, it won't set the price structure in there, but it will put it out there for those developers to say, okay, they're interested in building that structure. They will be the ones responsible to address and solicit and work on what those potential power purchase agreements would be and those off-taker agreements would be, and say, okay, we can do this and for this set price, and establish that. And that's what the county and yourselves will get back in the proposal effort. They'll actually propose what they're offering capability to provide that would be. And hopefully it's along the lines of what the research that Mark and the group did up front, and that it's within a cents per kilowatt range that is reasonable, and then ends up having a set component of what that additional cost could be back to the county. I guess the last thing I would like to add is I haven't been a part of that evaluation, but I've seen it in the studies that they've done. I think the big ticket entity has been in the jobs and the tax base and stuff associated with this. So it's not just the money that would get back to the county from this incremental cost of sustainability, but it's the cost back.
Oh, I hadn't gotten there yet.
Okay. Okay. Well, I hope that helps.
So in putting together this RFP, you're hoping that a developer will come to you with a proposal that will have core elements of development costs, then an overhead and an operating cost, and then a proposed structure for a fee that would generate some modest income for the original investors. Is that what we're saying?
I think
And we're
that's a pretty good. Yeah,
we're
you did a
part of
pretty
the
good-
original investment team.
That's right. I think that's a pretty good description.
Okay, then what is currently being charged in the market, and how much acceptability for a price increase is there for this, in essence, redundancy that protects information and technology?
I think it's the study that Mark talked about earlier, but and they've done the research on it. I don't know if you want to discuss it.
If I recall correctly, we did an analysis on that, and I think in Ohio, like the average commercial rate is between 9 and 10 cents a kilowatt hour. And then beyond that, companies are paying at least 5 cents a kilowatt hour in backup systems like UPS, the servers, their communications with the UPS, the generators that they have to run frequently for their backup. And so we estimated that currently in the market, a company, commercial enterprise, wanting to have 5 nines reliability would be paying probably on the order of at least 15 cents a kilowatt hour.
The final selection will be done by whom?
The Cleveland Foundation, the county, and the city of Cleveland.
So there are 3 parties at the table with equal votes? And then you'll come back to us for what?
Well, the contract will likely be with the city of Cleveland and the developer. So we may not come back to you for anything. We'll give you updates. We'll tell you what's going on. But the actual contract between with the winning developer will be with CPP. And that has to happen because they are the distribution company, the legal distribution company. If it comes back, let's say there's need for, let's say we get proposals back and it's a $100 million project, and the best offer we get is a company comes back and says, yeah, we're interested. We're willing to put in our own $80 million. And in order for this thing to go back, we need $20 million from other parties. And obviously, we're going to come back and talk to you, and maybe it doesn't go forward at that point. We don't think that's going to be the case. But at the end of the day, the contract will be with CPP and the developer.
And will we have an investor agreement with CPP? I think that when somebody gives me $100,000, there's a specific return on that, and it's written down on paper, rather than me just putting it in and saying, gee, if you make some money, I hope you give me some back by ancillary or offsetting investments. I'd like to see in writing that Cuyahoga County receives someone. You know my background. I want a return on my investment, and I want it in writing so that if somebody in the future says, didn't we put $100,000 to $200,000 in this? And other than the ancillary community benefits, did we actually get our principal investment back? I'd like to see our principal investment come back to us. Madam Chairman, I concede. I think I've sucked up enough other folks' time.
Those are fair points.
Thank you. I don't think there would be anything other than an agreement someplace to get reimbursed, right? Yes?
Correct.
Yes.
Yes, that would be part of the parcel of our
Of course.
agreement going
So
forward.
this is good questions, and one of the pieces of information that was valuable to me was to really understand how businesses are paying for this backup anyways. Hospitals and medical and research, they have to pay for the backup generation in case the electricity goes out and their business goes down. So they're already paying for it separately, but this would be an inducement perhaps for them to come here to reduce their overall cost and having that backup generation. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and I think, and I don't mean to speak for Mark, but at least the study that I think he referenced about 5 cents as backup, I think is actually low, and I thought that that's like the minimum companies are paying for that's kind of backup generation is 5 cents, the equivalent of 5 cents a kilowatt hour, but it's usually higher than that. In fact, the studies I think have been between 5 and 10 cents. So.
Okay, thank you. And then Councilwoman Brown, and then President Brady.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just trying to verify the numbers. If I understood correctly, the project is going to cost $100 million, and we're expecting $91 million, so that kind of gives us a $9 million negative over the time frame. Is my math off, or?
Well, remember, we're not putting out the 100. We're not suggesting that the county is going to be paying the $100 million. So someone else is going to be bringing in $100 million in to develop the project, and they're going to be making money off of their $100 million investment by selling power to companies. New companies are going to be coming into the district, and they're going to have new employees. And the estimate is that over 6 years, I think, that there would be that those new employees would bring about $91 million in new employment payroll, basically.
And that's and to my colleague's point, that's an estimate based on something we need to kind of see a little bit more tangible. Now, typically,
It is in the report. So I sent you this, 2 long reports last night that CSU had done, and it's embedded. The research is in there. It's the research they've done with the kind of the national marketing firms, and so there's good backup, I think, for coming to that number, I guess, and those are in the reports we sent you last night.
Okay, thank you. And then we're talking about a district. So generally, this, if I understood you all correctly, this is just a service that the individual owners take on for themselves?
Yeah, so that the people can opt in to becoming being a taker of the power, basically. And we're contemplating 3 tiers right now. So if you really want the most resilient power out there, 4 weeks, the power's down, you've still got your power, then you're going to pay a little bit more, and that may be around 14 cents. If you've got a backup generator and it takes you a little while to get it on, and you think the power's only going to be off, you don't need it, you're not, it's not really terrible for your business, then maybe you pay 12 cents a kilowatt hour, but you only get a guarantee of having your power on for an hour, right? And then if you don't care about it, then you're just paying whatever the regular rate that CPP has.
And generally, how often does something like this occur where the grid goes down for an extended period of time? Can you tell me the last time that happened?
Oh, for an extended period of time?
Like for
Hurricane
weeks?
Sandy, so 5 days, the power outage in 2000, the first energy power outage from, 15 years ago when we had, 4, 5, 6 days. And there's real concern about this right now, especially with, cybersecurity, right? So there's, hackers getting into electric grids and being able to turn them off, right, basically, and putting bugs in the grids. One of the things that I didn't talk about, but is cybersecurity is a real threat to power grids, and that this would be a very secure electric system, so that it won't be on the grid. The control systems won't be kind of embedded in the grid. They'll have their kind of individual communications within the system. So from a cybersecurity aspect, it's very secure as well.
Okay, and then with regards to CPP and Cleveland Thermal, do they have they made any commitments? Do we have any type of commitments from them?
Yes, so CPP has signed the MOU. We've got an MOU with Cleveland Public Power.
So how much is that for?
It's just a memorandum of understanding just to work together on this. So
Okay.
Mayor signed off on this. We've had many meetings with CPP, and they've agreed to work to move forward, and so we've got a memorandum of understanding with them, and they're here today.
Okay, and Cleveland Thermal?
Cleveland Thermal, nothing in writing, but they've publicly stated that they are interested in this, and so they're on record in Cleveland.com, plain dealer.
And then the last question for me is, will residents have an option or opportunity to take, to benefit from this, or is it strictly for commercial and business?
Yeah, if you're a resident and you really are concerned about this, you could opt in. It's going to be more expensive than the regular power you're buying off the grid. So, but I think those are things we'll have to work through as we develop this. It may be harder for residents to do it. This is really geared more towards businesses and kind of enterprises. But I think that there's an opportunity maybe for apartment buildings. I think that this could be something that, if an apartment building wants to make sure their residents have electricity, then this could be something that they could opt into. For individual residences, I think that's one of the things we're just going to have to weigh through once we get the responses back from the proposals.
Thank you.
Council President.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Let's see where I start. I know a little bit about Cleveland Thermal from years ago, and a little bit more about Cleveland Public Power. But I think it would be helpful as this process continues that council members become more aware of Cleveland Public Power and Cleveland Thermal. Not their history. not everything, but a better sense of it. Because if you haven't had any exposure to this, then you might not have it. It just may be a lot to presume. But isn't it true that this would be probably not possible if it wasn't for the infrastructure that exists from Cleveland Public Thermal and Cleveland Public Power over many, 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 many years?
No, it's vital, right? So both from the infrastructure standpoint, but also from the kind of regulatory standpoint, the legal standpoint, having a municipal electric company in the city is really, crucial for this project.
Right. So this is an opportunity that's not really just available to anybody anywhere. We may happen to be well situated, for it in a way that other places aren't.
Yeah, I should add, that's important, I think, because there's very few places in the country that have both a district energy company like Cleveland Thermal and their own municipal electric company. And so there's two assets we have that are really important for this thing to work. And it makes it harder for other places to develop kind of a district, like a microgrid district that we're talking about here.
And when we're talking about Cleveland Public Power, it's always important, I think, for everybody to understand that this is, exactly what it says. It's publicly owned by the city of Cleveland. This is not a for-profit. So when we talk about it, we shouldn't think of it in terms of a for-profit that we're dealing with. This is a not-for-profit, and it's been here since for over 100 years, and so there's quite a history behind it. But so it was founded to be in the public interest. Is the point. Its whole purpose is to be in the public interest. It has no other purpose. But answer me this, because I don't really quite understand this part. Cleveland Public Power, for instance, we'll say its footprint is certainly much larger than this grid. And when you talk about hospitals and you talk about these different institutions, are you saying that the grid, which I'm still trying to understand a little better, are you saying the grid is only capable of providing energy or electricity to businesses within the grid itself? Because that sounds like what you're saying, and so I'm wondering why, with a public power system that has a larger footprint than that, how are you going to get to some of these institutions that might be some of your biggest customers?
Yeah, so I don't think that the clinic or UH initially are going to be part of the first iteration of this. East 55th to downtown, the power lines are underground.
So are you saying, Mike, sorry, Director, that this may be at some point, if it's successful, which we would hope it would be, of course, there's a potential for expansion?
I think so. I mean, yeah. So the easiest place to do it right now is between East 55th and downtown because of the Untitled.
That's where the infrastructure is, and that's where the opportunity is.
Yeah. But, and you could go past East 55th, but once you start, then you got to start, at least, and we've talked to, Midtown Corridor and Health Tech Corridor, and they've got some, industries over there that maybe wanted to be, it may cost a little bit more to build lines underground over there. So, but there's a couple places over there that we could expand in this first iteration outside of East 55th.
Well, help me out then, because when you mentioned the potential customers and the hospitals were there, and what hospitals are you talking about?
I think that was a kind of the first slide where we had hospitals.
Yeah.
I think we meant medical facilities or healthcare facilities that are dealing with kind of health tech type stuff.
Think about that, because
I should take that hospital out of
given
there. Right.
the significant hospital industry we have.
But eventually we do it. If we do it,
define that a little more clearly.
Yeah, as we kind of hopefully we get good at this, right? There's other, obviously there's other places in the Cuyahoga County that could, may be able to expand into different areas.
I know in general where the substations are for Cleveland Public Power as well, and in some cases they are near large institutions. All right. Well, this is very intriguing. Obviously, this is. Compared to a lot of stuff that we deal with, this sounds pretty exotic, So, you'll have to be patient, I think, with the council in terms of, having an understanding of the complexity of this and why it would be in the benefit of the county to pursue it.
And I apologize. Sometimes we have been dealing with this for 2 years or so.
I know you internalize things, and then it becomes everybody
folks,
does that in different ways.
Terminology
Okay,
sometimes.
thank you.
Yeah, too bad about Metro, huh? They're close, but not close enough, but we'll see. No, it is exotic. I've learned a lot, going through this. I know you're next.
So, Madam Chair, Director, how many people and what kind of people do we expect to bid on this?
We've had interest from at least 7 large companies, large energy companies such as ENGIE. ENGIE, the French company that bid on the Ohio State grid. They basically bought up the grid and paid Ohio State $1 million for the internal workings of the grid, and now Ohio State's paying them back for electricity. So ENGIE is a large company. Let's see. OATI is a company out of the Midwest who's a large energy institution. Shell, Mark, help me out here. Shell Solar, Shell Power.
I was going to mention the Carlyle Group is already, even if the Carlyle Group, which is a private equity firm, they just, if you would do a Google search, one of the first things that'll pop up is this $500 million fund they just started strictly for investing in microgrids, and they would probably partner up with a control system company such as Schneider, which I think they've already done. They've entered into a joint venture where I think the capital will be coming from Carlyle and the control system would come from Schneider. So you would see AEP on-site partners, we call it the development wing of AEP. Any company in energy. Recently, I saw that Total Energy, the gas company, is looking at getting into microgrids and starting up a fund to fund microgrid projects like this.
S&C Electric, Carlyle Group, OATI, just got the email, I'm sorry. Shell New Energy's Corix, who actually owns Cleveland Thermal. They're a pension fund out of Canada that owns the Cleveland Thermal. AEP On-Site Partners, ENGIE. So those are companies that have all expressed interest. And Rockwell, who you have the letter from in front of you today.
So, let's suppose you go out for bid, and in the first quarter of 2020, you get your bids, and now that's the first step. Then you have to do a second step. Is that right? Where the first step kind of identifies a smaller group that are interested, and then you have a more detailed RFP. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, what would be the timeline for having a final selection on the one company that's moving forward on this?
So we're hoping by first quarter of 2020. So.
Okay. And would that company then have to go out and solicit and obtain contracts to offload most or all of the power before they could proceed?
I think that's, I don't know, let me defer to Mido on this, but they may be able to do this in stages. So maybe we've got a tranche of contracts that CSU has helped us already identify of potential off-takers, right? And so maybe instead of we've got this in phases, right? So there's a first phase of $50 million and a second phase of a next $100 million. I think as we built in, the study group built in kind of the economics of this, there was a ramp up in terms of customers over time. So that we anticipated by, I think, 6-7 years down the road, we would have 100% of the resilient power sold to off-takers in the community. That's what we've envisioned. So you won't have to have all of the customers right up front, but you'll need some.
And what's the length of time for construction of enough of the system so that it's operational for at least some customers?
Are you got any ideas on that?
Sure. Yeah, to go along with what Mike said too, I know in my involvement with the study group, one of the items they called those initial tenants anchor tenants. So from a standpoint of whoever the developer would come in, they would need to secure a handful of anchor tenants that would be that entity that would allow them to sustain the initial cost and development and start to build the grid out as Mike put out. So, CSU here could be one of those anchor tenants, similar to others. Nobody is going to, initially commit to just say, yeah, I'm in, and it's the price, because it's whoever that developer and their negotiations with those entities cost-wise would be. So if the initial, path forward in 2020, that developer had a positive number of anchor tenants defined and the contracts got them put in place, there's going to be legal, timelines associated with. They have to formalize their contract with CPP to operate, that system within the city, utility grid. So I wouldn't think that until, and then they have to go through an engineering process associated with the substation interconnects and the design. So, that process, we probably wouldn't, hit construction anywhere near until the 2021 timeframe. I would think that as we develop the RFQ and the RFP process more, and we would solicit and ask for those schedules and develop some, reference points, that the initial hope would be that within, say, a 2-year period, the initial anchor tenant microgrid side of it could start to be built out, and that would be kind of the timeline. And then depending on, who additional tenants they would add, they would then build the structure out past then. But that would probably be like the timeline.
So are you saying bid it out in the first quarter of 2020 and start construction sometime in 2021 and maybe have some customers in operation in 2023?
That's a fair statement.
Okay. And how was Middle selected?
So Middow that's a good question. So Middow was selected because of they are the consultant for CPP. So the kind of contracted engineering company for CPP. They understand the grid, they understand the interconnection, they understand the tensions the system has, the opportunities it has. CPP I don't want to say insisted on them, but they trusted them. And as we put together the MOU, that was one of the things that we said as we develop who's going to do this RFP. Mid-Owl was the logical choice to having the best understanding of the infrastructure that we're going to be working on to run that RFP process.
So, Madam Chair, Director, was this basically a sole source selection as opposed to any kind of a formal process?
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend I understand the difference between sole source, and I get in trouble for this sometimes when trying to RFP exemptions or sole source or any of that stuff. So we did this as an RFP exemption, and for those reasons that I stated before, is that they understand that grid is better than anybody else we know. I don't know legally if it's sole source or not. So.
And are there any microgrids currently in operation in the United States?
Yeah, so as I said before, there's a lot that are kind of behind the meter. So there, so like one entity has, a microgrid for their own operations for Air Force Base or military bases or college campuses. There's a couple of small community microgrids in Brooklyn, I think, and there's one in Chicago, but they're kind of 2 to 3 block areas. There's nothing kind of on the scale that we're talking about here.
And is there anything of this scale currently under construction?
No, not that we know of, and it's one of the things we've kind of been thinking about is. And Executive Budish asking us all the time, is anybody doing this? I want us to be first kind of in the arena, basically. And not that we know of. We look for this all the time. Is anybody else building kind of a district scale microgrid? Not that we know of.
Can I add one comment to that? Because it is interesting from a standpoint of being in the power industry. This happens to be this month's copy of Power Magazine. So from a utility and power side of things, it'd be the equivalent if you had Time Magazine and had who the Man of the Year or something was potentially. But this month, and the cover is what's in your microgrid. It's amazing the path forward with the restructuring of the utility infrastructure grid right now going on in our country, associated with it being rebuilt. Associated with our coal plants being shut down. You see in the news with the nuke plants. You see our new natural gas generation plants being built, wind farms, solar. So our country right now is going through a grid transformation and upgrade and rebuild in big time. And as part of that, something of cogeneration units, which a microgrid, is a combined heat and power cogeneration, would have been around for 100 years. In operation, taking that to the next step, including the digital technology world and the interconnectivity associated with being on and off the system and to add load, shed load, startup, resiliency, the cybersecurity. Right now, microgrids are becoming a big part of the future picture of the utility grid, that it's not going to just be the base utility grid and the First Energy, AEP, and others of the world supplying power, but these little interconnected aspects of some distributed generation and microgrids along the line of decentralizing the power and for some of the reasons. So even though it definitely is new, on the forefront in that, from a standpoint of being at the forefront of where the path is going. It is good to see the county and the city of Cleveland and Northern Ohio, being at the forefront of that. Not that it's separate from it, but it does have a similar play. The Icebreaker project, which has been in the news with the wind turbines out on the lake, and as a distributed generation entity into the picture, those all play into the mix, as well as the path forward with the city of Cleveland. And I think Mike had mentioned this to me the other day, associated with, as we go forward, not just the microgrid aspect of it, but where Middo, for example's interest, or Rockwell or others are entities who are interested in and being involved in that build out and that promotion of our capabilities and work and efforts, such that in Northern Ohio We're not just involved in building a microgrid in downtown Cleveland, but we're assisting building one, in Buffalo, in in other cities, or others as well. So it's new, but it's definitely the hot topic.
Madam Chair, that completes my questions. Thank you.
Okay, Councilman Baker?
Thank you. I don't know much about this, so I've learned a lot today. Thank you for your presentation. I guess I would ask just simply if the developers are financing the 100 million and it looks like we're going to get most of the money back in the initial 310,000, and Cleveland Public Power and Cleveland Thermal are taking the lead after we do the next step. What is the risk to the county? What risk do we have in moving forward on this project where it doesn't seem that there's much involvement?
Yeah, let's see, I've got this slide, I guess. It's minimal, right? So at least in terms of monetary dollars, it's
Well, even
$115,000
Right.
that if this thing explodes, doesn't go anywhere, microgrids somehow aren't important, no one wants to bid on this, then we would lose our $115,000, assuming the Cleveland Foundation came in. The other risk, though, is the risk of not moving forward, right? So the risk is not having this pretty cool thing that companies are interested in taking advantage of, because they care about resilient power. And so the risk is not having those companies come into this district that we're potentially creating. So losing that revenue from those new businesses, those new employees,
But that
and
would
kind of
be
the
losing-
reputational loss, I
Right,
think.
that would be losing revenue that we don't have now. So to me, that's not really risk because we don't have it now. So if it gets, let's say we get to the point where we are building and we're trying to bring in those that want to participate and be part of this energy source, and it stalls. We're halfway in, it stalls, we're having difficulty getting those that want to contribute or want to be part of this. At that point, is there any risk to the county when real dollars start flowing into this and it's built maybe 25% or 50%, and we're looking for those anchors, and those anchors aren't coming as we thought? What is the risk to the county? And not that loss of jobs that we don't have now, that to me, that's not a loss, we don't have them. Is there any dollar risk that we're vulnerable to if this stalls at any part of the process beyond the initial 100,000?
Yeah, so we would not have any other money out there that we've put up for this project. So we're not going to be losing any money. If that were to happen, right, then potentially there's a request from the developer, hey, we're not getting enough customers and we need some assistance from government. I don't know that that's going to happen, and that is, I guess it's not something we're anticipating. I mean, what we're anticipating is the winning bidder comes with their own money all the way up front, and that's what, and if that doesn't happen, then obviously we're going to be coming back to you and asking you for both permission to proceed, I think, or at least explaining to you, maybe CPP is doing this with all of us, right? Hey, these guys have got a $100 million project. They've got $80,000 of it, and we're going to need money. And at that point, we're either going to ask for more money, and you're going to say yes or no, or that they put the money up and somehow it doesn't, gets halfway done and they want to pull out. Those are, I suppose that's a potential risk, except that it's their money and they've already put in the dollars for the infrastructure upgrades to the system,
Right.
which it seems to me, which is not a bad thing it doesn't hurt us in any way.
Well, it could have a structure that's not operable, and I don't think that would be, if
If it's substation upgrades, if it's, this is, infrastructure upgrades that someone else is putting the dollars up for, I don't see how that can hurt us.
okay. And so you don't, and the guests that we have here, you do not anticipate that you would be coming back to the county and asking for more dollars because you're desperately needing of that anchor, and that anchor is not going to contribute unless they see more county money invested.
Yeah. At this point, from the conversations we've had, people are going to be bringing their own money to the table. if they come back, we did this RFP process and that theory is not borne out, then obviously we're going to let you know that, right? So, and we'll have a separate conversation. But that's not any of the discussions we've had with potential operators, developers. There's capital out there to do this. They're interested in this project.
Okay, I guess that's probably my biggest concern. The second would be the liability in, let's say the power goes out. I don't remember power ever going out for 4 or 5 weeks, but let's say the power goes out and we ramp and there's a failure. What is the liability for that? And does the county have any liability involvement with that at all?
No. So the developer operator will have the liability. The insurance policies will have the liability if that happens.
Okay.
So if we're making a claim that we've got this really high resilient power and it fails, is that what your
Right.
question is? Yeah, then the liability would be on the operator.
Okay. And then thirdly, I would think it would be an asset to have our own economic development people involved. Have they been in the throes of this? Do they understand what we're doing? Are they at all helpful in giving some guidance? Maybe even our other partners like Greater Cleveland Partnership and all that. We had a pretty extensive economic development overview. I didn't hear a lot of knowledge coming from them on this project, and I hate to work in silos. So are we anticipating, even though in the last couple of years we haven't brought them in, will we be doing that?
Yeah, and so at different parts over the last couple of years, development has been in different phases of this, especially we've talked about customer development and potential customer development. I mean, Paul Herdig's here now. Tomorrow we're meeting with a bunch of developers to talk about this and some other projects. So, and so I think Ted Carter, who's the development director, I think you're right. So it's been, kind of, they haven't been fully immersed, but they've been somewhat immersed, and I think Ted wants to be more fully immersed now. So.
Good. Thank you.
Sure. One more question.
Okay, Councilman Miller.
My additional question is to the extent that Cuyahoga County itself has need for power at the 99.999 level, and would you see the county as being an off-taker of this electricity?
Councilman, we may for some portions. So, maybe the jail, right? But not for. And this is like kind of one of the elements that a business could have. That maybe CSU has that. So if they've got some labs that they only need a portion of their load needs to be, on the 99.999% offtake. So a portion of it they're paying higher portions of dollars for that. We may have that as well, maybe over the jail or safety services. Obviously, I don't know that we've got anything in this building that is if the power goes out for an hour that we're gonna lose $100,000 worth of work. I don't think we have any of that. But those are things I think we'll analyze over over the course of the next couple of years.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, no other questions from anybody? Are you looking to get this moved out since the period, which is stated here, is actually retroactive?
So I think we have to get the contract actually made for sometime in early July, I guess. So we have to change the date on that, which I think right now it's for June 28th or something like that. So yes, we need a new contract, but we'd like it passed today if we can. So.
Okay, so are you looking, so it's no longer May, right? We're going to change the term of the contract
Yes,
prospectively.
Yes.
And if we go through our 3 readings, is that going to be acceptable?
I think so.
We're on break, though, in August. I'd like to get this before the end.
I would like to get it done as soon as possible.
So our
obviously,
next council meeting, we could have second reading, and then the third reading would be when, Madam Clerk?
Be the second meeting in July. Next meeting is July 11th, and then July 23rd.
Okay. So July 23rd would be third reading? Is that, okay, good. Okay, and the other risk, which if I can offer up, is simply the grid going down, cyber attacks, natural disasters. I mean, we've got a trend now for cyber attacks, which doesn't seem to be taken seriously enough. Other places at the top that might be able to give us some controls here. So this would be important for us to have.
Yeah, and look, more violent storms, we're seeing
Well, of
this
course.
consistently. And,
Yeah, I mean, this is the future now where we're going to be looking at power loss. And when you look at Venezuela, any of these other South American countries, we're seeing just an epidemic of huge power loss for days. And it's really devastating to the economy and to the people that live there. It's beyond comprehension for us because we take this for granted that every day we're going to turn on a light switch and we're going to have power and light. But that's not everybody's experience anymore, where, we take a lot for granted. And I think as we move forward, this is something we're going to see more of, that we can't take it for granted, that this will be at our fingertips. So this, for me, is really important to take this minimal risk in a fund that's not part of our general fund, that's there for this purpose. And I think the potential for gain is vast. So I think it's really exciting for us to take a lead on something when we have the assets, like you said, Thermo and CPP. That's a unique blend right there that will enable us to lead. So I guess I'm going to ask I'll make a motion to move this to the next full council meeting for second reading with a recommendation of passage on third reading.
Discussion,
You want a discussion on that? Sure.
because I wanted the principal to be returned in some way to the county.
Well, I don't know that 115,000 is going to be returned. It's not guaranteed.
Okay, I'm going to vote no then.
Okay, thank you. All right, so any other discussion? Yes, President.
It seems to me that there is going to be a lot of questions about this from the council as a whole. We're pretty good. You got a lot of us here today, but you're still missing half of us. And so I just don't want you to underestimate in any way how many questions there might be before people come around to seeing this as something that they're willing to support at this time. I think that I am willing to support the idea of the county initiating this process, which is all I see it as. The county initiates the process, has very little risk. It may work. We would hope it would work, but there's no big downside to it that I can see. But it's because of the nature of it. It's not going to be something that will, go through the normal process of the council like road repairs. So you're going to need to really be able to convince councilmen, because my sense is that will take some time, and we can try to stay on a timetable that you want, but again, this is different than what people see. And they're going to have a lot of questions, and there's going to be some skepticism just because it's different and it's unusual. And it's going to be important to emphasize that the county has very little risk here. We are simply being proactive in initiating something that may be very important to Greater Cleveland over time, so. Having said that, while I'm willing to support your motion and willing to support sending it to the full council, you better be prepared to take the time, however much time you need to take, because the council only has so much of it in terms of its formal meetings, to convince members of council that this is something that they're willing to support. Don't take that for granted in any way. I'm in support, but I think you've got a ways to go to get to a majority of votes, and 6-5 votes aren't really good votes.
I understand. I hear you, Council President. And so whatever, look, I know this is new, right? This is complicated, and there's a lot of parties, and there's a lot of, kind of promises, potential promises out there. And look, I know that everyone's heard promises before about a lot of different things, right?
It's just, there could be 1,000 questions, is all I'm saying.
Right.
I mean, I could ask you 50 more questions, but I know nobody's interested in that. But,
We're more than willing to answer them. So,
well, I'm just saying, this is not your average bear, as they used to say.
Mr. President, it is not that different. However, when we initiate RFQs and RFPs, that's what's being missed, I think, is that's all this is. It's beginning a process, and we do this all the time. In fact, any economic development loan exceeds $115,000 every time it comes before us. There's loans like, and so it's. I understand.
First, like I've said, I'm in support.
I
I'm
understand
giving
you
my
are.
advice about where I think the mind of the council might be at this particular point in time.
I totally appreciate that, and will respect that and do whatever's necessary to educate council, but it's really not different. And when we look at this, the risk we take every single time we give a loan in economic development is way beyond anything of $115,000. And maybe the new people on council haven't been here long to see that we give loans all the time. Some fail, don't fail. But I understand that there's going to be a lot of questions, and if we don't have time to go through those questions in a formal setting, then I guess we have to find a different way to do that, because, there's only so many people who are on this committee, and if we have to have other council people apprised, and we don't have time as council as a whole because everything that's going on, then, I guess I'll leave it up to the director to try to, or through the chair, to find ways to educate on what this is. I understand there's a million questions, but it's really not new. It's just interesting, the twist we've got, a complex twist. So I don't know how you want to move forward.
I would love to move forward on a vote to take this to second reading. I am more than, we're more than capable, and I can have Ali Ahmed, who's in Denver at a Microgrid conference, who was in the video today, and Andy Thomas, who's with CSU, works with Mark. Any of us are more than willing to take questions, and Mark and any of the other parties are willing to take questions. Anybody, we're willing to do one-on-one meetings with folks to make sure that we're making folks as comfortable as possible with this. So I'm more than willing to set those up. So.
Okay. Well, yes.
I think that the concern that I have, and I think it would be reiterated by others, is, once we're in and once we're partners, even if it's the beginning initiating process, we wouldn't want this to fail. And government tends to be the savior of projects that, even though we don't have a lot of money in, we're still part of wanting to support it. So my concern would be that if it doesn't go as perfectly as what you have outlined here, and that we don't get the anchor like we hoped we would, or we don't have enough anchors, or whatever the issues may be, especially since we're the first, that I think is where we are vulnerable. That's where I feel we could be vulnerable, because we are the government entity that we would automatically be coming to say, can you give us more, or can you lift this project, or can you invest more? This has a lot of potential. We're just stuck for whatever reason. And that's where I think others might be. So if we can have perhaps a conversation about that and ease some of the tensions there, and that it is only $115,000 at risk, and that we no longer will have any other liability, then that probably would make things much easier.
So we're going to need some clarification that this is the risk, and that's where it pretty much stops, right? So we'll have to figure out a way to do this. I mean, I'm willing to, I have a motion to move it for second reading, but there'll be time to go through, hopefully in the next month, more discussion on this. I don't know what forum or venue, but whatever it's gonna, we can try to put forth some plan for that. But yeah, I mean, government is right now bailing out the nuclear power plants the third time, and government does tend to intervene at times, and that failed twice, and now we're at HB6 again. So this is small potatoes compared to what the State House has been doing with the nuclear power plant and First Energy. So I'm happy that we're looking at smaller grids and being able to diffuse some of the massive power at the top at First Energy, if you're listening. So, fine.
I'm willing to second the motion. I'm willing to send it to the full council. I'm only cautioning that there's going to be discussion.
We just have to find a way to have that discussion, and it's not going to be here because there's only so many of us here on the committee. So we have to figure out a
You
way.
need 3 votes.
We just have to wait to have discussions, to do it. No, it's just a practical question, how are we going to, I don't know if it's a committee of a whole discussion. That's all I'm bringing up. Maybe that's it. And if we need more time, we'll have more time. And we do go on break, so that might be a problem. It might not, but we'll move through it. Thank you. No, I get it. Councilman Jones, did you want to pipe up?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Council President gave wise advice. So I'm willing to move it forward, but just out of deference to my colleagues, I'll simply move forward. I will consider my vote after the conversations have happened.
Okay, so the motion is to move this out of committee and go to the second reading at the next full council meeting, and that's all we're doing, with hopefully some further discussion someplace along the line before it comes to a third reading, whenever that will be. Okay, so that's the motion.
Okay.
Do I have a second? Okay, second by the president. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
You're an aye?
Opposed.
You're opposed. We have one opposition. Okay. Thank you
And
so much.
Council President, I hear your advice, and we'll just set up individual meetings with folks. So, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Director Foley. Do you want to introduce before we thank you guys, CSU and
Oh, I
Just
do. We have
quickly,
staff for the
miscellaneous.
Department of Sustainability. So we've
Yes.
been running on low fumes lately. Stephanie Choi used to be our sustainability coordinator. Went to Southeast Asia, and she's been there all summer, and she's going to grad school this year. So we've got a new sustainability coordinator, Monica Bosom, who's standing in the back. And then Ursula McVeigh is our summer public policy fellow. So she's been helping us this summer work on putting PowerPoints together and helping us. We're trying to think about plastics in the building, actually, and trying to think of kind of doing an audit of just kind of what's going on in terms of the buildings, in this building, and thinking if we can up our recycling rates. So Ursula's working on that right now.
okay.
So thank you very much, folks. We appreciate
No,
it.
thanks a lot. It's interesting, and I appreciate the time you all put into this concept. With that being said, I'm going to adjourn the meeting.
Madam
Oh,
Chair,
yes, Councilman Miller.
miscellaneous business. Director, since you brought up about recycling, I'm just wondering if you saw the report that 85 to 90% of the recycling collected from residences in the city of Cleveland goes into the landfill. And we should be thinking about what we can do about that.
I agree. I mean, there's just been a huge problem, and just in terms of recycling, not in Cleveland, but everywhere. Just China's not taking our stuff anymore, to be honest with you. So we have to think about different ways that, the bag ban is going to be very helpful, I think, in reducing plastic. But are there other ways that we can be taking our recycled goods and doing something with them, or recycling more? We used to be able to just throw a lot of stuff out, and it would somehow get over to China, and they would use it. They're not doing that anymore, so that market has gone away.
Yeah, Director Foley, Malaysia shut down its doors, second to China now. We can't recycle our way out of this, Councilman Miller. We just can't. We've got to stop the single-use habit.
Okay, thanks.